My name is Shally, and on March 15th, I learned exactly how dangerous it can be when a CEO's daughter believes her family's dirty secrets give her unlimited power over everyone around her. It started like any other Wednesday morning. I was in my office by 6:30 a.m., coffee still steaming, reviewing the compliance reports that had kept our pharmaceutical company from facing FDA sanctions for the past 3 years. That's when my door burst open without so much as a knock. Victoria Sterling, 18 years old, fresh out of her Swiss boarding school, daughter of our CEO Margaret Sterling, marched in like she owned the place, which technically, her family did. "You think you can humiliate me in front of the board?" she snarled, her designer handbag hitting my desk with a thud. "When I give you instructions, you follow them. Period." I remained seated, maintaining my professional composure. "Victoria, I don't take instructions from non-employees." Her perfectly manicured fingers clenched into fists. "I'm the future owner of this company. You'll do what I say, or you'll regret it." I raised an eyebrow. "Then I'll take orders from you when you're actually qualified to give them. Until then," I gestured calmly toward the door, "please leave my office." I knew dismissing her so directly would have consequences. I just didn't expect them to unfold so quickly, or so ruthlessly. Let me take you back 6 months to when Margaret Sterling made the announcement that would change everything. Her daughter Victoria would be joining the company as a strategic advisor for her gap year before Harvard. Most of us assumed she'd shadow a few departments, attend some meetings, and disappear back to her privileged bubble within weeks. We were catastrophically wrong. Victoria wasn't just given a meaningless title, she was granted something far more dangerous: access to her mother's deepest vulnerabilities. You see, Margaret Sterling wasn't just our CEO. She was a woman desperately trying to protect a secret that could destroy everything she'd built. The truth came out during a late-night conversation I'd overheard between Margaret and her assistant. Victoria had accidentally discovered that Margaret had been embezzling funds through a shell company to pay for her own mother's experimental cancer treatments that insurance wouldn't cover. The amounts were massive, the paper trail was sloppy, and if discovered, it would mean criminal charges, company bankruptcy, and the end of Margaret's career. Victoria, with the calculated cruelty only a spoiled teenager could muster, had turned this discovery into her personal weapon. She held her mother's freedom hostage, demanding unprecedented authority within the company. Margaret, terrified of losing everything, had no choice but to comply. So when Victoria waltzed into our offices with her fake title, she came armed with something more powerful than any MBA or business degree: the ability to destroy her own mother with a single phone call to the authorities. At first, I tried to work around her. When she demanded I fire our top researcher because his presentations were boring, I quietly reassigned him to a different project. When she insisted we change our drug trial protocols because she had a feeling about them, I nodded politely and ignored her completely. But Victoria wasn't content with being managed. She wanted absolute obedience, and she was willing to use her mother's desperation to get it. The breaking point came during our quarterly board meeting. Victoria had insisted on presenting a revolutionary new strategy that would have violated at least 6 FDA regulations and potentially killed patients. I couldn't stay silent. "With respect," I said, standing up in the middle of her presentation, "this approach would trigger immediate regulatory review and likely result in our license being revoked." The room fell silent. Victoria's face turned crimson, but she couldn't argue with the facts. Margaret looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. After the meeting, Victoria cornered me in the hallway. "You embarrassed me," she hissed. "Nobody embarrasses me." "I prevented you from destroying the company," I replied calmly. "You're welcome." Her smile was pure venom. "You have no idea what you've just done." That night, I received a text from Margaret: "Shally, please come to my office first thing tomorrow. We need to talk." I barely slept. By 7 a.m., I was sitting across from Margaret's desk, watching her struggle to meet my eyes. She looked like she hadn't slept in weeks. "Shally," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "I'm afraid I have to let you go." But before she could continue, I leaned forward. "Before you do anything you'll regret, I think you should know that I've been documenting everything." Her face went white. "What do you mean?" I pulled out my phone and showed her the folder I'd been building for months. Screenshots of Victoria's dangerous demands. Audio recordings of her threatening other employees. Video evidence of her attempting to access confidential patient data without authorization. I also have this, I said, sliding a printed document across her desk. It was a detailed financial analysis showing the pattern of fund diversions to Meridian Health Solutions, the shell company Margaret had created. But instead of evidence of embezzlement, my report showed something else entirely: a brilliant CEO who had found a legal loophole to provide compassionate care funding for terminal patients whose insurance had failed them. Margaret stared at the papers in shock. How did you? I restructured the payments through our existing charitable foundation, I explained. Retroactively. Every transaction is now legally compliant and actually enhances our company's reputation for compassionate care. Her hands trembled as she read. This makes it look like it was always intentional. It was intentional, I said firmly. A CEO who cares enough about patients to find creative funding solutions when the system fails them. The board would be impressed, not suspicious. For the first time in months, Margaret lifted her head and looked me directly in the eyes. Why would you do this? Because I believe in this company. Because I believe in what we do. And because I refuse to let an 18-year-old bully destroy something that saves lives. Margaret was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked, "What do you want?" "I want Victoria out. Permanently. And I want you to remember that you're a CEO, not a hostage." That afternoon, Margaret called Victoria into her office. I wasn't there, but I heard the screaming from 3 floors down. Within an hour, Victoria was escorted from the building by security. But Victoria Sterling wasn't finished with me. Not by a long shot. The next morning, I arrived at the office to find my access card had been deactivated. My computer was locked. My nameplate was gone. Margaret called me into her office, looking defeated once again. "I'm sorry, Shally." Victoria threatened to go public with everything. "I had to choose between you and the company." I nodded calmly. "I understand." But what Margaret didn't know was that I'd been preparing for this moment for weeks. While she and Victoria had been locked in their toxic power struggle, I'd been building something else entirely. I'd reached out to Dr. James Morrison, our head of research, and Sarah Chun, our regulatory affairs director. Both had been quietly documenting Victoria's dangerous interference with critical projects. Both had been preparing their own evidence files. More importantly, I'd been in contact with the FDA's Office of Criminal Investigations. Not to report Margaret's financial arrangements, those were now perfectly legal, but to report something far more serious: Victoria's attempts to access controlled substance databases and her demands to alter drug trial data. The federal investigation began the day after I was fired. While Victoria was celebrating her victory over me, federal agents were reviewing months of evidence showing her attempts to manipulate pharmaceutical trials, access restricted databases, and interfere with regulated processes. Her age didn't matter to the FDA. Interfering with drug safety protocols was a federal crime. The raid happened on a Tuesday morning. I wasn't there, but Sarah Chun kept me updated via text. Federal agents in building. Margaret in emergency board meeting. Victoria in handcuffs. I read the messages with a strange sense of calm. I hadn't orchestrated this for revenge. I'd done it to protect the thousands of patients who depended on our drugs being safe and effective. The official charges were filed within 48 hours: conspiracy to tamper with pharmaceutical trial data, attempted unauthorized access to controlled substance databases, and interference with federal regulatory processes. Victoria's privileged background couldn't protect her from federal criminal charges. Margaret called me that evening, her voice hollow. "The board wants to meet with you tomorrow. They've asked me to step down temporarily." "And Victoria?" "She's facing federal charges. Her lawyers are trying to negotiate a plea deal." The next morning, I walked into the boardroom for the second time in my career. But this time, the atmosphere was completely different. The board members weren't interrogating me, they were thanking me. The chairman spoke first. "Shally, we understand you've been instrumental in protecting this company from serious regulatory violations. We'd like to offer you the position of Chief Compliance Officer, effective immediately." I paused, considering. "I have conditions." He nodded. "Let's hear them." Zero tolerance for nepotism in any department. Mandatory compliance training for all executives. And full authority to implement oversight protocols to prevent this situation from ever happening again. Agreed. I signed the contract 2 days later, not for the title or the significant raise, but because I wanted to ensure no company would ever again be held hostage by a spoiled child with dangerous information. Victoria Sterling pled guilty to federal charges and received 2 years in minimum security prison, followed by 5 years of probation. Her conviction made national news as a cautionary tale about privilege and pharmaceutical safety. Margaret Sterling was quietly asked to resign, but the board allowed her to keep her pension and reputation intact. The charitable foundation I'd created in her name continued funding compassionate care for terminal patients. On my first day as Chief Compliance Officer, I walked past Victoria's old office, now converted into a compliance training center. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. Because this wasn't about revenge. It was about ensuring that the sacred trust between pharmaceutical companies and the patients who depend on them could never again be weaponized by someone who saw human lives as leverage in a family power struggle. 6 months later, our company received the FDA's Excellence in Compliance Award. During my acceptance speech, I said something that I still believe today. Real power doesn't come from the secrets you hold over others. It comes from the trust you earn by protecting those who can't protect themselves. Victoria Sterling had tried to destroy my career because I wouldn't enable her dangerous demands. Margaret Sterling had tried to sacrifice me to save herself from her daughter's blackmail. But neither of them understood that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to be intimidated by someone who mistakes cruelty for strength. The last I heard, Victoria was working in her father's real estate firm after her release, under strict supervision and banned from any healthcare-related industry for life. Funny how that works. When you build your power on fear and manipulation, it crumbles the moment someone refuses to be afraid. And as for me? I wake up every morning knowing that thousands of patients are safer because someone stood up to a spoiled teenager who thought her family's secrets made her untouchable. That's the kind of victory that never gets old.